guys, I have to tell you, I am excited about today's session for a couple of reasons. It gives me a chance to reconnect with Paul Long, who was a very interesting person I met a few years back. And it's also an opportunity to talk about a topic that is so critical in business today, which is essentially how do you unlock the creativity and the innovation of your people. Everybody's kind of looking for that magic bullet, that magic idea. How do we make that happen? And certainly our topic today is going to zero in on that. So I'm going to introduce you to Paul Long here in a minute and have him tell his story. But just to kind of set the context, we're going to talk about the role of fun in organizations, how we can make it, get more leverage out of it in terms of making it a better workplace, attracting better people, unlocking more of their potential. Also going to talk about what leaders can do to bring more fun and unlock more of that potential of fun in the organization. I'd love to hear from Paul also about some of the mistakes he's seen, because he just really operates in this space. But to get us started, Paul Long, why don't you just introduce yourself quickly here and kind of tell us what got you into this fascinating business of Fundamism and, and just in general, what got you doing what you're doing?
Well, first and foremost, you established some excitement about our talk. I would like to say the same for you, my friend. You obviously understand that I have a great deal of affection for you. And so this is something I've been looking forward to a great deal. And to kind of carry forth the same kind of theme that you talked about in terms of hearing some of my mistakes, you're going to hear all of them, brother, because I am a mistake-ridden individual. So I am a speaker, podcaster, author, and self-proclaimed master of shenanigans. But I like to tell folks that my titles and what I do is not necessarily important. But what is important is that now, collectively, more than ever, whether it's your organization or your personal life, we find ways to empower individuals and one another to focus more on what's good as opposed to what isn't, because there's a lot of stuff that's not working right now. And so, when you ask how I got started, my career started in an environment that you spend a ton of time in call centers. So I was the guy answering the phone calls. It's a wonderful day here at, insert whoever I was working for at the time. How could I make your day wonderful too? And this kind of, jazzy spirit and Tigger-like mentality, it's just always been in my DNA. So my career culminated as a director of call center operations for a Fortune 300 company. I had everything that society, Michael, told me would make me happy or convinced me that would make me happy, the six-figure income, positions of influence, not having to jump through the red tape, being able to create this culture of fun that everybody desires. And I was probably the most miserable that I've ever been. And it was something that relates to you, because I know that you and your wife are very close, and I haven't had the opportunity to meet her, but it was my wife, Melissa, that empowered me one day to say that, I know that the world needs Fundamism, but nobody needs it more than you. So I encourage you to chase after your dreams. And so with tears in my eyes, I agree. And I gave my 2 weeks the next day, and the rest is history. The keynote is a different story, but that's essentially the backdrop.
So if you could give our viewers just a 30-second definition, what is Fundamism? And I'm sure it's probably evolved since you started, but what does that actually mean to you?
So Fundamism is defined as the fundamentals of a fun and optimistic lifestyle. So imagine if we were all as deliberate, focusing on what's working and what's good and what makes you smile, as we consistently express, or the thoughts that we spend time in, of what's not working and the challenges that we face in life. I mean, think about organizations for perspective, for an example. And I know this resonates with you because we've had a previous discussion about it. Mm-hmm. In sales organizations, we set all of these goals, right? These benchmarks for success, and then we reach them or we exceed them. And we spend far more time trying to get to the mountain than when we're on the mountain, actually looking over and just enjoying the view and patting ourselves on the back and saying, we did the dang thing. So Fundamism is about celebrating the journey, focusing more on what's working as opposed to what's not, and being deliberate in things that create joy, fun, and fulfillment in life.
It's funny that you say that. I remember early in my sales career when I had a really traditional kind of sales role, the thing that really struck me after doing it for a few years is that after you had a great month and you hit your number and it was really exciting, all that kind of thing, the next month you started at zero. I mean, the next day you started at zero. And it's like you immediately got back into that kind of deficit. I've got to really charge forward to make progress and such. And the amount of effort it took to hit the number was enormous. And then, there was this very short little celebration. And I always felt that was one of the things that just ground salespeople, down, is just the constant, hey, that's great, but what are you going to do this next month or this next quarter or this next year or whatever? And that's the thing that always fascinated me about sports teams, is that you have a season where you prepare for the season. You get in shape and you learn your plays, and you got your new team members and all this kind of thing. Then you get into the regular season and you're really grinding out, trying to make wins. But after every win, you get into this locker room and you celebrate a little bit, and then you make it to the playoffs, hopefully, and you win that first round. It's a huge celebration. Second round, even bigger second celebration, and God willing, you make it to the national championship, whatever that is, the World Series or the Super Bowl or you name it. And if you win that, then the celebration is extreme. And I think that whole idea of just elongating and making a bigger deal out of celebration is such a big part of what better organization seems to do to bring in more of that kind of fun factor into their meetings and in general into their culture. I'm curious what your take on that is.
Well, so, sports is the great uniter. I think that we could find parallels in just about anything from a sports perspective to how we run organizations. And I would say that my first impression of what you're saying is, the one thing that we'll never receive enough on in this world is appreciation, right? I think it was Tom Brady several years ago. I think he's been to 7 or he's been to 10 Super Bowls and won 7, something like that. So don't hold me accountable. But he was asked in some form of interview if he felt appreciation for all that he had done for the Patriots organization back then when he was with them. And he paused, like a very deliberate, long pause, to the point where it created almost an awkward moment. And people were wondering, like, is he happy? And his response was, I think that if you go out and you ask anybody in any organization whether they feel appreciated for all that they've done, they'd probably say no. He said, I feel aligned with my executive team, the leadership team, the Patriots organization, but do I feel like I am consistently appreciated for all that I do? No, I would be lying if I said that. I think that aligns perfectly to what you're saying. If the greatest, and I don't think there's any argument, I don't even like Tom Brady, if the greatest quarterback of all time, who's now been to 10 and won 7, can say that he doesn't feel appreciated to the extent that he feels deserving of, then we're in a very common space.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in many organizations, the concept of celebration is actually a fairly inexpensive thing to execute on. I mean, when you look at how do companies create better performance, and there's all these big tech projects that have a big price tag to them and incentives and this and that and the other thing. But little moments of celebration are something that you just plug into your daily and weekly and monthly calendar and just create it. And it's something that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money that can make it happen. And like you're saying, it is an insatiable need. It isn't something that, wow, we've covered the appreciation fun bucket for the year. I mean, it's something that needs to be addressed. And that's almost too formal of a word, but it's something that needs to be cultivated on an almost daily, in some cases hourly basis. I'd be curious, Paul. You think about this all the time. I'd be curious about what is fun. I mean, what actually is it? It's a kind of a difficult thing to get your grips around. I mean, creating fun. How do we create a fun environment? It's one of those things. I think we all know it when we feel it and we see it. But what do you think it is, and how do you define it in terms of when you're working with organizations?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to note that fun is first of all a journey, and the question that you ask and the answer that you seek is not one that could be supplied by me. Because my impression of fun is completely different than what you would define as fun, or Dean, the esteemed individual that set this introduction and this whole thing in motion. We all define fun differently. And so whenever I work with organizations, it's one of those things, Michael, that I have to hit head on. Listen, I know that you see the bow tie and the Goonies shirt.
Said booby traps. You mean booby traps? That's what I said, booby traps.
That is, I don't know if you knew that was the Goonies on my shirt, but they see this stuff and they see it as informal, potentially immature, not something that they would particularly align with. And they say, well, if this is the benchmark for fun, count me out, because this isn't in our organizational culture. My goal is not to establish your fun for you or define your fun for you, but rather ask you very deliberate questions to get you to self-discover what fun looks like for you. We had a really meaty discussion last time we met about, engineers, or I've had the opportunity to work with the Department of Transportation, bankers, accountants. I've worked with every single organization. And you know what? Not one individual has ever said, oh, I don't want to have fun. It's just that fun looks differently for them.
Yeah. It's a very personal thing. And I think that when you look at organizations and you do projects with them and such, what are the mistakes that leaders make, the correctable mistakes, let's say, that leaders make that kind of squelch or kind of suppress the fun factor in the organization? And what are some obvious things that almost everybody listening or every leader could probably tap into based on what you've observed in all the organizations you've worked with?
Well, this is a really fun discussion, no pun intended. And it's fun because, there's so many people. You even referenced this on the last call that we had. I think there's a lot of people right now in organizational development and in culture that are talking about the why. You have to have your why. Why is something important to you, which is super important. But you could understand the what, you could have the why, and then you could have all the questions as to how and fall flat on your face. So we like to start every interaction with something very, very simple. And it's something that I'm sure that you do, Michael, with all of your clients. We have to establish where we currently are and where we aspire to be. So first, we ask a simple question, like if you had to assign a number, a baseline for where your level of joy, fun, and fulfillment is currently in organizational culture, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, what would it be? And hopefully there's enough humility to say, oh man, we're at a 5 or we're at a 6. And that's a really great place to be because there's a long runway. But then once we establish where they are and then factor in where they aspire to be, well, then you have to ask, if 10 is the ideal goal, knowing that that's the pie in the sky, the mountaintop that we referenced earlier, what are all the things? First of all, what does that look like? That's important. And that's that self-discovery, that fun journey that we talked about. Like if you had the most fun culture, what would it look like? And we go to a whiteboard and we start figuring it out. Meaningful one-on-ones, team meetings that are engaging, Zoom meetings where it's not just one person talking to a camera, but rather they're standing up and there's energy and sound drops and whatever it may be. And so we really get this robust list of what could potentially be fun. And we say, if this is pie in the sky, if this is what the most fun organization would look like, what are all the things that get in your way? What are all the things that are currently challenging you to reach this? Well, interestingly enough, what it always is, it's us. Like it's our mindset. It's our perceived roadblocks or challenges. Well, we're doing it this way because we've always done it. Something that you referenced earlier, Michael, that I really appreciated. You put it in a to-do list box. We checked them out. We appreciated them today. No, it's not a to-do. Yeah. A culture. It's a lifestyle. It's a philosophy that we live. So I have a million different ways to create fun in organizations, but that's a high-level overview of the process that we use to get there.
When I look back on the entire pandemic year, it obviously went through a lot of different stages where we were all it was new and everybody was working from home, and then it kind of got tiresome, and then we've gone through all these different levels. But I think one thing that a lot of us remember was early in the pandemic, everybody was watching more TV and such, and there wasn't a lot of new material. There weren't a lot of new movies coming out, and we couldn't go to the theaters and such. And there was that Michael Jordan series that came out, and it seemed like everybody watched it. It was the first new thing that came out. I think it was called The Last Dance or something like that, where they went through all the seasons, and Jordan was giving his explanations. But he said something several times through that, which really struck me. And it is such a blinding slap of the obvious. And he was obviously an extremely driven guy, worked hard and all that kind of thing. And he kept saying over and over, he said, listen, winning is more fun. I was like, why do you work so hard? Why do you make such a sacrifice? Why do you drive yourself so hard? Why do you drive others so hard? Why are you so hard to be around? Why are you so relentless and just, absolutely unaccepting of anything but everybody's best? And he kept saying it over and over. He said, winning's more fun. And I think there's something about that element as well, is that, when fun is attached to a successful accomplishment, because you can kind of almost trivialize it and saying, let's have fun even though we're not doing well. That's not the same as let's have fun and celebrate because we are winning. We are making something happen. And there is a connection between creating a high-performing group that earns real, genuine, earned celebration kind of fun. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about that whole connection between winning, success, performing, and does that elevate the level of fun?
100%. But I think it starts with the conversation that we had earlier in terms of appreciation. Why did Michael Jordan think that winning was so fun? Well, Michael Jordan was on the cover of every freaking magazine. Michael Jordan always had cigars in his mouth and was going and gambling in Vegas, having a great time with all of his winnings. Michael Jordan was jet setting all over the place. He was, you had all the videos of him holding, the trophy, and he was constantly recognized for being the best player on the planet. Would winning be that fun to the everyday sales organization if indeed they didn't get any of that recognition? I would say probably not. Right. Especially if you reach that mountaintop and you say, great job on quarter number one. We exceeded every single performance metric. I'm proud of you. Now, what are you going to do quarter two? Yeah. And we're so hyper focused on what's next that we don't always appreciate what's now. And, going back to this whole element of fun, you talked about fun is important when you're winning. Fun is also in the journey as well. And one thing that I am certain that you subscribe to is the performance of any workforce is going up if they enjoy what they do, if they find value in what they're doing, if they showcase a genuine interest in others, if they feel appreciated, if they're celebrated when a job is done well, when they're getting developed. See, all of these things create a fun culture. And then the outcome, the performance metrics that you referenced earlier, is just a byproduct of this whole fun process and journey that we created in our culture all along.
Yeah, it's like it's a multiplier. I mean, success is real, genuine success. Progress is, that makes the journey quite a bit more, fun. I mean, all elements of the journey are valuable. And even when we fail or when we reach, experience hardships or barriers and such, that part of the journey can actually be, in many cases, the most meaningful and where we really grow from those tough experiences. But the fun tends to happen when we make breakthroughs and when we make progress. And that whole idea, last time we got together, we were talking a little bit about mental flow states and how fun is kind of a big part of that, is when you're enjoying what you're doing and you're good at it. I mean, that's the other thing that Jordan talks about. When you're good at what you're doing and you have real talent at it, it's much easier to get into a flow state. When you're in a learning process and you're trying to acquire a skill and you're a little bit outside your comfort zone, we don't always experience that much fun. But when we get good at something and we master that skill and we're sort of in the flow of performing it, it leads more to that kind of fun flow state that we're talking about. And I'm curious what your research and your just in general, you're thinking about sort of that mental flow state and its relationship to fun and maybe even some advice you could have for people listening in here. How do you get into that and stay into that more in a workplace environment?
Well, I think it's important first to establish what I'm not before we get into what I am. So specifically, I'm not the smartest guy in any room. I enjoy fun a great deal. I don't appreciate, actually, that's not true. I appreciate statistics, but they don't give me a ton of strength. So when we talk about research, I'm the guy that's going to come in and tell you philosophically all the things that fun could be, but then show you how to do it and celebrate you along the way as we do it in partnership together. I don't have a lot of statistical numbers to say employee engagement will go up 76%. Retention of your employees will go up. Customer experience will go up. I have the utmost faith that it will, and we've seen that over time. But I don't believe that it takes a statistic to know that When we focus more on what's working and what's good, the stuff that isn't starts to dissipate, right? When we start to celebrate all the things that are working, now we're talking about hacking the flow, that mental state, that mental state that you referenced, and something that I could appreciate a great deal. So I had this podcast guest recently. I got a podcast called the Fundamism Podcast, available wherever you guys download your or stream your stuff. But I feature this gentleman by the name of Cody Isabel, who was he's a neuroscientist. And as we're talking, like probably not news to you, Michael, that as I'm talking about this stuff, I get amped. Like energy is just, I just love this stuff in conversation because I believe that it can truly help individuals. I've seen it. And so this gentleman, as a neuroscientist, he's hearing me talk and he's getting just as jazzed as I am. And he's like, Paul, everything that you're talking about just equates specifically to science and the way that the brain works. And so our conversation culminated in this, dotted line or parallels to fundamism and fundamentals and to how the brain works and how it got there. And so specifically, when you're experiencing, challenge or a fear of judgment, or you're down in the dumps because you've perceived or your perception is that you failed. Well, that your brain is producing something very real called norepinephrine. NoRep is what they call it. So the more that your brain produces that, the more you feel lethargic, the more that you don't want to try anything new, the more you feel down in the dumps and you start to manifest stuff that's not working. Well, what do you do when you're in that moment? Well, what combats that is something called dopamine, that great feeling that you get when you're doing something that makes you smile or gives you joy. So the concept of fundamism is, how do we incorporate or generate more dopamine to cast shadows and doubt and ultimately move out some of that no rep and get to a more of a flow state that you referenced? Well, that's done through a series of different things. I'll give you a very specific example. You talked about celebrating, success. The journey is just as fun. And so I remember in my corporate world, historically, in my experience over there, we had National Customer Service Week once a year. And a National Customer Service Week, we would get together as a collective team, our directors and our supervisors. So we get in the room and we would write out personalized thank you notes to each and every single one of our team members. And so the cool thing about that is, as we're in there, my supervisors, my team, they're writing handwritten notes, what they appreciate, personalized to each respective member of their staff. Well, I'm in the same room writing out what I appreciate about them. And we tie together like little mini-sized candy bars. And the goal or the intent, of course, is to deliver that. Well, we talked prior to coming online here, Michael, about the power of music. I love music. I believe it's the great unifier. I believe that you could find any song to evoke any sort of emotion that you want to feel.
Definitely.
At the time, I had an iPod, and I'm very eclectic. I have just a wonderful taste and love and affection for all things music, no matter what the genre is. And so I think I had 15 supervisors at the time. I challenged them. I said, I guarantee you that if we go around this room, I will have at least one song from each one of your top 3 favorite bands. So if you name your top 3 favorite bands, I bet you I have a song from at least one of them. And that's what the team meeting was. So we're writing out personalized thank you notes, and I'm playing the songs of the individuals that are coming around the room. Now, as you're listening to this, what does that have to do with anything? Well, first and foremost, what it allows them to see is that I'm relatable. As a leader, they're not in this on their own. I'm finding something that resonates with them. I'm showcasing their goodness by asking them genuine questions on what they're interested in. And then I'm allowing everybody to enjoy and appreciate it in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then it created some kind of fun competition, whereas like, oh, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? And in closing on the story, I will say I lasted all the way to number 15. And number 15 was the band that I was certain that I had was Queen. And Don't Stop Believin'. That's Journey, sorry. And I didn't have it on my iPod, but I was literally listening to it in my car on the way in through a CD. So I lost is the moral of the story.
You talk about music. I've played guitar my whole life, and there's one article that I came across a couple of years ago that really struck my attention. A friend of mine sent it to me. He's always sending me kind of music related stuff. And it was a study that was done on musicians. And essentially what they did is they hooked them up to all kinds of brainwave and, MRI kind of imaging stuff while they were playing music. And what they found out was that while they were playing music, that in general, the amount of brain activity, whole brain activity, reaches about its highest level that humans are capable of in a sort of normal waking state. In other words, more areas of your brain are firing and connecting and just working together, and more energy is being just tapped into when we're playing music. And I think what you're talking about is music is something that creates, especially for the person playing it, a real sense of joy, in a very high level of fun and joy and connectedness, and kind of leaving your logical mind behind, so to speak. And I think that when I see people that are especially, I'm always thinking about sales organizations, because obviously that's the business that I'm in, and how can we bring this in to create greater joy and excitement and all that kind of thing. Your story reminded me of a woman I met about 10 years ago. Her name was Mary Ann. I'll never forget her. I was doing a project for a company that was selling mortgages, and there was like 100 salespeople in the organization. And I always start my projects the same way. I like to meet the top 5 or 6 performers and just listen to them and find out what they're doing. And I had heard about her because she was not just a little bit better than everybody. She was a lot better than everybody. She had like double and triple the kind of results that everybody else did. So if everybody else was closing $1 million of mortgages on a monthly basis, she was closing 2 or 3 million. I mean, way ahead. So anyway, she was in a room with 3 or 4 other salespeople that I was listening to and kind of doing a roundtable focus group sort of thing. And, I asked questions, what is it that makes you different? How do you create results and all that kind of thing? And, everybody kind of told their story. And then when it came to Mary Ann, her turn to answer the question, she was definitely the superstar in the room. She said, before I answer that question, I'd love to learn from you, Michael. And she started asking me some questions. What have I learned about top performers? What got me into what I'm doing? And she literally listened to me for like 10 minutes. And, after the meeting was over, I came up to her and I said, it was really fascinating. I've done a lot of these focus groups. I've never seen somebody turn it around like that. And she said, well, the reason I do that is I really enjoy listening. I find it's fun for me to listen and hear other people's insights. And it became really obvious to me, that's why she's successful. She finds one of the most important parts about influence, which is listening to others, listening to understand, the Stephen Covey principle. She found that fun. And as a result of that, when you talked to her, you felt this great release of somebody that was really curious and genuinely wanted to know what you had to say and interested in what you had to say. And I think there is this element of, when you're around people, of letting go and listening and being, taking joy in just experiencing others, rather than always having to kind of put yourself out there. There's something about that relates to that mental relief. And good. The reason I'm saying this is that good leaders and good managers, they create meetings and they create celebrations where they're not the star, where the other people are the star, and they're listening to them. And that's part of what creates fun, is that the team itself is celebrating as opposed to just being recognized by someone else. Curious on your take on that.
Well, I think, and this is super cliche, you've heard it a million times over in your career. Oftentimes in organizations, I experience this no matter whether I was an entry level, mid-level manager, and oftentimes even as a director, we sit and we wait for everybody else to create the culture that we desire. We need leadership to give us the okay that we could be this, that we could do this, that I could wear a Goonie shirt and a bow tie, right? Which, though there are some limitations, there are some lines. But in my experience, as you're waiting for somebody to create your fun for you, you're going to be waiting for a long time. So this change that you're referencing, it could come both top down and bottom up, right? Like the young lady that you referenced in this meeting. One of the things that I love about that whole story is, in this Fundamism concept, we don't just talk theoretically. We really give some specific tactical things that we call fundamentals to help improve organizational culture and the amount of joy, fun, and fulfillment in it, thus impacting every performance key indicator. But like you referenced, that is one. Listen with intent. Deliberately listen. We've all had those experiences, Michael, where you're talking to somebody, and in the midst of your point, like you're talking to somebody, and no sooner do you just start moving your mouth, you start to see that quiver lip that they got, their lips are moving. And when their lips are moving, all they want to do is talk. And when they want to talk, they're no longer listening. So in that situation, especially as a leader, it's in that moment where you have to say, time out independently in your own head and say, I'm not getting anywhere right now saying what I'm saying. Let's take a deep breath and stop and say, hey, Michael, it looks like something that I said has kind of created a thought in you. What's going through your mind right now? And now all of a sudden they feel like they're a part of the process rather than you exercising your opinion or your vision of what you want this to look like.
Early in my career, Paul, I was very fortunate. I had an excellent mentor. He was an older guy. I was in my early mid-20s and he was in his 50s. I was living in New York at the time and he was in St. Louis, and he kind of really became that mentor for me. And right after I met him, he sent me a copy of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Everybody should buy and read that book. It's one of the great books ever written. And Viktor Frankl was a Nazi concentration camp survivor. And he had a kind of a psychology background. And he wrote this book when he came out of it about his experience. And it was an incredibly inspiring book. I mean, you would think it would be very dark and, just from the experience of it. But one of the things that he said that is just so memorable is he said, in the experience of being in that concentration camp, they can take everything away from you, literally everything. You're obviously you have no possessions and no wealth at all. You have no power. They can take away your relationships by moving you around. They can disorient you. They can do all these different kinds of things. But he said the one thing that you can always create, and that is maybe the greatest craving or greatest need for everybody, is the desire to be understood by someone else. And when you are understood by another human being, it creates this sense of sort of joy and relief and release. And he said, even in the most dire situations, when you come in contact with other people in that, in that same concentration type environment, when somebody would take the time to listen and understand he said, what a feeling of relief it was. And one of the main themes of the book is just this whole point that we all crave to be understood by someone else. And the person that provides that, as a way of, part of their journey is that I connect with people, I listen to them, I understand them, I give them an opportunity to express themselves to a person that's curious and that's not judgmental and that's not interrupting them every 30 seconds with what I think and such. I think it creates a kind of environment in an organization where it becomes a learning organization. And I think that's part of the fun factor as well, is that people want other people to express themselves and be themselves. Obviously in a productive sort of way, but they want people to be their authentic selves. And I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think a lot of us are nervous about expressing our authentic selves, that it could be career limiting, perhaps, if we overdid it. Or, maybe it's better for me to play safe and stay within the guardrails, so to speak, of what our corporate culture defines, especially in more conservative cultures and such. What is your take on that whole element of the risk of being yourself in an environment that oftentimes rewards playing it safe and staying within the guardrails?
Well, the universe is a magnificent place. I know that you believe in energy, and whatever you want to see in this world, you're going to find. And so ultimately, if you're having a bad day, right, and the coffee spills on your shirt, you're running late to a meeting, now you hit every single red light, what happens is we start to expect those things to happen, right? Like, it's not that goodness isn't happening around us, it's that we're so hypersensitive to everything that's not working, we're not seeing what is. And so I was thinking about this conversation with you earlier today and super excited. And as I'm mindlessly scrolling through social media, because that's really healthy and good for creating dopamine in my brain, I come across this Gary Vee video. And Gary Vee, of course, is world renowned for a lot of things that he does, but specifically, mindset and growth orientation, stuff like that. But the premise is this. He said, when you have the humility to know that you mean nothing and the ambition to mean everything, magic can happen. When you have the humility to know that you mean nothing and the ambition to mean everything, then things can truly be magnificent. Like, the world is at your fingertips. So the reason why I recite that to you is I know that this is a huge limiting belief for the greatest proportion of society. Fear of what everybody else thinks, fear of acceptance, fear of judgment, all of those things. Well, I mean, Chad Carden, obviously a mutual friend of ours, and I'm sure he got it from somebody else, used to say, don't worry about what people think about you because they don't think about you, right? That's a very harsh way of saying that no matter what you believe in your head, no matter how much you prep for this meeting with a legend like Michael St. Lawrence, or a job interview that's coming up, or a sales pitch to a prospect, whatever it may be, as you're prepping and you got everything that you want to say and all your T's crossed and your I's dotted and you just feel like you're going to nail it. And then immediately it doesn't go the way that you want it to. And you're in your head and you're walking away from that experience dejected, and you believe that you failed. You're laying in bed that night and it's just caroming downhill. Like you're just thinking about all the stuff that you could have done differently. The one thing that I could assure you is nobody is thinking about that experience more than you. And so when you find your comfort in the fundamental that we like to call embrace awkward moments, when you find comfort in not having all the answers and not knowing what to expect every single time, it's a liberating experience. Because when you can navigate those waters and you could see everybody else getting super uncomfortable and having to say something, having to fill the void, right? The void of silence. And you're just sitting back there comfortable knowing that you don't have all the answers, you're embracing awkward moments, then a byproduct of that is you are going to differentiate yourself in the space. And it's because you're comfortable with who you are and that piece of your authentic spirit. Everybody in the planet is trying to be somebody right now. And unfortunately, that somebody is oftentimes driven by what we see others doing, whether it's social media, whether it's top performance that you referenced earlier, whether it's the thought that I want to be a boss. So, well, successful people do, what they do is they watch what other successful people do and they replicate it. That's in part truth, but how do you differentiate yourself in that space? By embracing your authenticity. You've asked me a ton of questions, Michael. You broached this subject earlier. What do you think some of the biggest roadblocks or challenges are for organizations to embrace fun and create this organizational culture that's really founded on joy and fulfillment?
I think if I look at some of the trends that I've noticed in the last 20 years in terms of how people interact with one another in organizations, the boss sort of employee relationship and the organization employee relationship, the thing that has changed a lot is technology. I mean, technology has just become such a bigger role. We all interact with, multiple platforms. I have 5 that I interact with in my business constantly. So there's all kinds of technology. There's just so much more measurement and, metrics of what's being measured. And there's so much more interaction with data and, the ways of representing it graphically and all that kind of thing that I think one of the things that has happened is that more and more conversation tends to be about data and metrics and, are you hitting this, or you're going there, or, what happened? Why isn't this happening? And I think, this is part of scale. Organizations have large scale. So somebody at the top wants to know a number and they just keep bringing it down until they get it. And I think this conversation about metrics and data and numbers is, there's all kinds of value to that. But we also need to remember that it's generally speaking, most people wake up in the morning, especially sales organizations. Most people wake up wanting to succeed. I mean, I have not met a lot of salespeople. I've met more salespeople probably than most people on the planet. I haven't met very many that wake up in the morning saying, God, I cannot wait to have a crummy day, or I hope I make no sales today. I mean, that just is not the case. People wake up wanting to succeed and such. And I think that oftentimes we focus so much on metrics and data that we don't focus on like what Michael Jordan was saying, is that you've got to get skillful to win, and winning is fun. And the more we focus on getting people skillful and stop making mistakes that are absolutely going to limit their results. Again, coming back to a sports team, if you've got a wide receiver that just, is not getting to his route as quickly as possible, you need to put him through some speed drills so that he's going to get faster. And, but because if you don't do that, he's just not going to outrun his competitor, and he's just not going to catch a lot of, he's not going to be open very often. So I think organizations need to focus on skill development. And as it relates to salespeople, those are things that have to do with how they interact with folks. And I think the second thing is that I really think a lot of leaders just lead crummy meetings. To put it just bluntly, their meetings really suck. They're boring. They're kind of self-serving. They're very policy driven. They don't really have a structure that's fun. I mean, one of my tips, and I'd love to hear a couple of short tips from you as well, and it might be good to bridge into this, is that I think every meeting should start with a quick roundtable where everybody in the meeting shares, give us a 45-second condensed, distilled success you had in the last 7 days. What happened that you created that was really exceptional that we all need to hear about, and just creating experiences where people can share things that they're doing well and progress that they're making, versus the typical meeting, which is what we're not doing, what we need to focus on, what we need to put more energy on, a new goal that we have. Sometimes we need to kind of step back and do that. So I'd love to kind of in this last segment, Paul, I want to challenge you and myself as well. What I want to do is do a lightning round. All right. And the lightning round is going to be basically this. I want you to give in, let's say 30 to 45 seconds, a really good practical tip for leaders that might be listening in on this, of how do you create the kind of fun that really attracts good people, supports good people, creates an environment where top performance can occur. It makes it a better place to work, creates a better culture, and all that kind of thing. One tip, 30 to 45 seconds. We're going to do 3 quick rounds, and each of us is going to give 3 quick, hot lightning round tips. What is your first tip to a leader of what they can do quickly to generate some results in their sales, in any organization, whether it's sales or operational, you name it?
Well, keeping with the theme of meetings, let's start there. Just had a meeting with my Noah's Panage Project board, focusing on pediatric cancer research and awareness. And before we kicked off the meeting, I had every single board member on a Post-it pad write down the answers to 3 questions. The first one, what's your ideal walk-up song? What's your ideal walk-up song? Second question, what was your favorite childhood sitcom or cartoon or show growing up? Third question, what motivates you? Third question, what motivates you? So what happened is, throughout the 2-hour planning session that we had, I would pull out one of these Post-it notes and I would read the answers to the questions: favorite song, favorite childhood sitcom, and then what motivates you out loud. And the group would have to guess which board member it was. Well, the byproduct of that, of course, we got to know one another. Self-serving leader in me got to see what people were motivated from. And now I could typically incorporate that in how I manage our meetings moving forward.
Awesome. All right. Here's my tip. If you run a sales organization, start practicing with your people more. Practice is a great way to generate more fun and breakthrough. I oftentimes ask salespeople and sales managers, when was the last time you had a really healthy, hard-driving practice session as a sales team? And most people cross their eyes and like never. We never do that. There's an easy way to do it. What you do is you ask each salesperson in a meeting, whether it's 3, 4, 5, or 10, you name it, to picture a prospect or a customer they want to generate better results with. So they get that person in their mind. Ideally, it's somebody they know reasonably well. Then you simply ask them a question. You say, respond to me as though I am that person. And the question could be something as simple as, what makes our company different from our competitors? Or why should I do business with you? Or what is it about this particular solution that is different from what our competitors are doing? And then ask them to answer as if talking to you, the customer. Go around the room, have each person do that. And then at the end of the round, without interrupting anybody, ask what were the really highlight things that were said that we can make each other better at. More practice generates better results, more fun, more breakthrough. Another quick 30, 45-second tip, Paul.
Sticking with the theme, if we're going to practice, then as a leader, I got to know how to do it myself. I see a lot of folks fall flat on their face from a leadership perspective because they're unwilling to get into the trenches and demonstrate the desired skill for a number of reasons. We don't know how to do it. We're fearful of exposing our own warts. We feel like there's not enough time. But you could allow people to practice, but not understanding what the desired outcome is and what our, as a leadership team's expectations are, is setting them up for failure. So get to know the desired skill, practice yourself in a comfortable environment, demonstrate it for your folks, and then allow them to practice.
Excellent. I'm going to introduce another one that I would just call random acts of appreciation. We always talk about random acts of kindness and such. What about a random act of appreciation? At the end of the day, before you finish your day, before you call it quits, or maybe when you start your day, you look back over the last, 6-7 hours you were working, you say, who did something exceptional? Who did something helpful to me? Who did something helpful to a customer? Who did something helpful to a team member? And, take 30, 45 seconds to call that person. Maybe you're going to leave them a voicemail. Maybe you're going to send them a quick email, you name it, and just say, listen, just completely out of the blue, I just want to let you know that I noticed that you did something special today. Maybe nobody else in the organization saw it, but I saw it. And, that thing that you did with XYZ customer, that's the kind of thing that is just really helping us to grow and develop and become better as an organization. I just want to let you know that somebody noticed. And just express a sense of gratitude to people that are doing things, that are moving the ball forward, steadily and gradually. Don't think it's always got to be some gigantic accomplishment. Sometimes the little things people do during the day just go unnoticed, and become a person that randomly appreciates folks for little breakthroughs. Let's hear another one, Paul.
Be relatable. And so this really hails from two things. First of all, understanding who your team is and what they're about, but also two, being willing to express a little bit of vulnerability. If you think about all the jobs that you appreciated throughout time or the leaders that resonated with you, they're typically one thing in common. Somebody that was willing to sit down with you, have difficult discussions, also tell you about some challenges or plight that they went through, and then ultimately devising a plan collectively as a partnership and moving forward. So case in point, maybe somebody tells you a very difficult thing, and in your next team meeting, you find an anecdote or a story that captures the essence of what they're going through and how to make it through. You read that out loud to everybody, and every single individual could pull something from that story. But the one going through it, they understand that story was deliberately selected for them, and they respect you even more as a result.
We'll do one more round before we close up here today, Paul. My last one is I think it's really helpful when we as leaders, managers and such, when we reach out and talk to customers. So we look at the people, our customers that our employees have, and we call them just to, schedule a meeting or schedule a call, a very informal, and just ask them some simple questions like, listen, what are we doing well? What's something that my team has executed well for you? How could we get better? And you just kind of listen, a listening session, gathering intel like from the ground up of what the customer thinks. And then when you get comments that, hey, our people did something really well. Hey, Bill did something really exceptional in solving a problem for our team the other day. You write that stuff down. And then when you have a meeting, bring it up. Say, listen, I was talking to XYZ customer. I asked him what we're doing well, and he made a special point of saying that Phyllis did this thing to solve this problem, and make a big deal out of it. So gather intel right from the customer, and then bring it right back to your team and thank them and congratulate them for the things that they're doing that are making a difference that customers are noticed. Your final one here, Paul.
Could you imagine if we just did these 7 things that we've just recited thus far? So the last one, I would like to kind of remove ourselves from the lightning round, because I want a more fruitful discussion about this, and I want your take on it.
Sure.
One of the things that I consistently hear in working with clients and organizations and individuals that gets in the way from joy, fun, and fulfillment at work or at home is monotony, doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. Email, voicemail, compliance. Every single leader has something that they have to do that gets in the way from having fun or creating fun. So enter one of my favorite fundamentals of Fundamism, which is called a new spin. How do you take these monotonous tasks and flip them, inject them with just a different bit of a perspective and enthusiasm to bring more fun? So for example, Michael, if I were to call you right now and got your voicemail, what's your voicemail greeting sound like?
Wow. I would have to go back and listen to it, Paul. I have not heard it in a while, but I think it's pretty basic. Hey, you've reached Mike St. Lawrence. I'm not here right now, but I'm glad you called. I'm going to try to get back to you as soon as possible. Leave a message at the beep. I think that's about it.
So, Michael, that is a very common response. You're an individual that works in sales. What do people buy? What are people buying when they buy your service?
Oh, they're buying better results. They want a sales team that's going to start improving quickly.
For sure. And they're doing it with somebody like you because they have confidence that you could do that. They're buying you as an individual in your relationship as well. If you were to call me, this isn't better, it's not worse, but if you were to call my voicemail, it says, "What's good? You've reached Paul with Fundamism, the fundamentals of a fun and optimistic lifestyle. Leave your name, number, and your favorite childhood sitcom, and I'll be sure to get right back to you. Be safe, smile often, and have fun." Now, that voicemail greeting takes, 5 seconds longer, 3 seconds longer, whatever it does. But what it effectively does, it captures the attention. It challenges the monotony of somebody's day and their expectations. Phenomenons that have happened as a result. I've gotten calls. People have immediately hung up when they get my voicemail greeting, and they text me, "I got flustered hearing your voicemail. Call me back." I've also gotten 3-minute long voicemails about the relationship of Zach Morris and Screech, RIP, from Saved by the Bell. So when I call them back as a sales individual, my first point of reference isn't business. It's a relationship. It's showing a genuine interest. It's relating to this topic that we talked about personally, and then transitioning to something where, hey, now that we respect each other, we've had a little fun, let's talk about how we offer each other mutual value. So what is something that's very monotonous in your day, something that you do at work currently, Michael, that is somewhat mundane and something that you no longer look forward to?
Wow. I'm probably the wrong person to ask this because, my life is so project driven. My days have an enormous amount of diversity to them and stuff. I think more in terms of some things are hard to do. I don't have a lot of like super monotonous stuff that I do. I mean, sometimes just going through an email box to get the clutter out, I feel like that's sort of a routine thing. But I always think in terms of what are the hard things that I have to do that are easy to put off or easy to procrastinate just because they're painful to get through. So I don't know. I may not be the right person to ask that because I don't really have a ton of monotony in my job. My day is filled with a lot of, interesting, diverse things to do.
Here's a brief follow-up question. Would you rather be talking to me on this webinar or work in that email box?
Yeah, well, that is an easy answer. Absolutely. Talking to interesting people about interesting things, I think, is one of the great joys of life. And I really have intentionally tried to create that sort of subtext to my life, is that the things that I do put me in contact with interesting people that, and then we can talk about interesting things. I think that's really, to me, one of the real joys of work. I mean, that's one of the reasons for work, is to come into contact with interesting people that are doing interesting things that you can help them, accelerate what they're doing. So the answer to that question is that having this conversation with you, Paul, is infinitely more interesting than collating through the junk in the email box.
And for you listening at home, it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the fact that we're just both driven by learning about others. Okay, So here's the new spin, Michael. I would say that one common response in nearly every keynote that I've ever done to monotonous tasks or email. I've never met anybody that says, "I love work and email." But then you said, "I'm really driven by finding interesting things out about other people." So how do we put a new spin on working email? How do you learn about Dean and the fact that you guys have this musical connection in an email form? How do you have you ever read emails aloud in the voice you perceive them to be in your head? Have you ever, something that we used to do, Michael, in the consulting world, did you ever do this with your peers where they would challenge you to work in a word seamlessly in your interaction with the group? Did you ever do that?
Oh yeah. We used to have a bet. Can you work this word into your opening 5-minute, spiel or whatever? Yeah.
Yes. So same thing applies to email. What if you had a little fishbowl? And this happens in team meetings and one-on-ones and customer interactions. What if you had a little coffee cup or a fishbowl, and every single week or day you wrote down a number of different obscure phrases or words? You put them in that little coffee cup or fishbowl. You pulled it up, and the next email that you worked, you had to work in that word seamlessly into your interaction. So that is a new spin that gets you a little bit out of your head, and that norepinephrine that we talked about brings a little fun and dopamine to the situation and changes the way that you look at things.
Wow, that's great advice. In closing here, Paul, I haven't really given you a whole lot of opportunity to talk about your company and stuff. Maybe you could give any viewers that are curious about how to contact you and or what how they can access what you're doing and speaking in organizations. What's the best way for them to access you? How should they do that?
Sure. Well, I appreciate that platform. My business is primarily focused on helping organizations, and I do that through keynotes primarily. So I typically do 1 to 2 hour keynotes. I do workshops and whatnot. I don't do a ton of consulting. I'm not closed-minded to that. I've done several projects and cut my teeth there, as evidenced by our relationship. But truth be told, the speaking career keeps me so busy that I don't have a ton of time to devote to consulting. So if you want to learn more about speaking and jump starting your next annual event or team meeting, or, just a good old fashioned one-off motivational, inspirational session, you can go to fundamism.com or pauljlong.com to learn more. And of course, on the screen, all my social media outlets are at Fundamism Paul. Michael, one thing in closing, I do primarily all of my work via speaking now, and the speaking career found me. I didn't find it. And I don't think that you know this, but I had a gentleman call me out of the blue years and years ago by the name of Mark Norman. And Mark Norman had a keynote for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America that he couldn't do because he was double booked, and asked me if I could deliver a keynote. I had never delivered a keynote before in my life, but I wrote one out and I delivered it the next week. And about 10 minutes into this session with golf course superintendents, I realized that what I had to talk about was not what they wanted to talk about. And it was fun because what ultimately ended up happening, I said, what gets in the way from having fun? And they said, these millennials. And it went down this path of a really fruitful discussion of how we manage people and teams and personalities. And we all came to the conclusion that to manage millennials, it's not that we have to change them, but rather we have to change us. The reason why I bring all that up is I think that's imperative, whether it's the sales gym, whether it's creating more fun in your organizational culture. You got to get out of your own way. You got to learn what motivates other people. You got to learn what they find fun, and ultimately create together the culture that you're looking for, because you can't have all the answers yourself.
Boy, what a great closing message. There's no doubt about it that the development of our own potential and becoming more skillful, becoming more efficient, becoming more fun, becoming a better listener, better communicator, that just makes everything better. I mean, that just, when we develop our potential, it just increases the opportunity, likelihood, the odds of success. And again, like what Jordan says, Tiger says the same thing. Winning is more fun. And the more of your potential and more of your genuine self that you develop and the skills you develop, the more of your likelihood of experiencing winning and fun and just success. And that all just really, that's like a gigantic multiplier of the whole thing. So Paul, I want to thank you for being a really fun conversation today. I hope those of you that were tuning in today got a chance to really zero in on the whole idea of fun and Fundamism. Look to Paul if you're looking for a speaker for a unique event that you've got coming up where the idea of fun and approaching things in a different way could be helpful to you. And again, Paul, I want to thank you for being with me today, and thank and appreciate everybody that tuned in to hear us today.
It was an absolute pleasure, my friend. Be safe, smile often, and have fun, everybody.
All right.